Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar, Successfully Selling Geothermal. This event, brought to you by the news, is sponsored by Climate Master, Inc. I'm your moderator, Barb Check-and-Hanks. Thanks for joining us. Today's expert presenter is Richard Gibson. Mr. Gibson is a district manager for Climate Master. He has a BS in education and is an IGS HVAC certified installer. Since having begun his career in the HVAC industry in 1989, Mr. Gibson not only started two HVAC companies, but he also held management and training positions for both Sears and Service Experts. In the late 90s, he created a national in-home sales process for the Sears Home Improvement Organization. Before we begin the presentation, I want to provide you with a few housekeeping items. To the left of the slide area, you will find a resource box. This allows you to click Help for technical difficulties, enlarge slides for better viewing, or download slides for a printable copy of today's presentation. You can even invite a friend to join us. If you need additional assistance, send an email to webinars@bnpmedia.com. Above the resource box, a blank questions box allows you to type a question into the box. Then hit the Submit Question button to send it to us. Later in the live program, Richard will address as many questions as possible, and will follow up on any additional questions afterwards. One continuing education professional development hour is available for webinar attendees. Please click on the Download Certificate link to the left of the slide area to receive a certificate of completion. Today's event is being recorded and archived on www.achrnews.com. All registered participants will receive an email within 1 to 2 business days that has a link to view a recording of this event. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's expert presenter, Richard Gibson.
Thank you, Barb, and welcome. And I look forward to spending the next 45 to 50 minutes with you exploring this successfully selling geothermal. We have quite an aggressive agenda that I've established today, so we're going to be moving along quite rapidly throughout the day, but it will be available for you, as Barb said, for you to later download and to explore even further. Some of the things we're going to look at today is we're going to take a look at what are some professional sales traits that you as professional sales associates need to embody. We'll also take a look at briefly at what is geothermal. Is there actually a need for geothermal? And if there is a need for it, what's involved in the sales process that we're going to need to utilize to successfully sell geothermal? Embodied in that sales process will be the discussion of who is your customer. And also we'll deal with a couple of objections, the major ones that you'll probably come up against. And we'll finish up the presentation looking at the economics of geothermal and the installation. So let's get started and move right along our way. First, I want to discuss the topic of professional. To truly be successful at selling geothermal, you're going to need to develop some professional traits. You know, selling geothermal is much like a Mercedes-Benz or an equivalent car. It takes a higher level salesperson than a person selling a Ford Focus. You also have to remember that your client most likely has never seen or experienced a geothermal system. So they, in essence, can't smell the leather or kick the tires before they make this purchase. So we need to keep that in mind, and that's why it takes a higher level to sell that. Jim Rohn said you don't get paid for the hour, you get paid for the value you bring to the hour. So what value are you going to bring? That's the question that we want to examine and talk about over the rest of our time together, is how do you bring value so that you can be more professional and have more satisfied clients to your business? Well, part of being a professional in sales has to do with your image. It's been said that you never get a second chance to overcome a bad first impression. The first few minutes of a relationship are often the most important. Creating a positive impression increases the probability that you and your products will be accepted. Dress and grooming are only one aspect that forms first impressions. Your voice inflection, your posture, your personality style, and attitude are all equally as important. Our attitude is reflected in everything we do. including our relationships with our clients. Now, I like to try to think of our clients as valves through which our energy can flow rather than as dams or obstacles, if you will, who are going to stop our progress. The depth of knowledge. I want to recommend that you set aside time on a regular basis during which you can deepen your knowledge and hopefully your enthusiasm for your field and for geothermal. And not only having a depth of knowledge in your specific field, but without a breadth of knowledge, a variety of topics, it's going to put you at an automatic limit with the number of people you're going to be able to relate to and who can relate to you. And it's been said, anything worthwhile takes effort, and this includes expanding your conversational horizons. Well, sensitivity, I probably have lost 3/4 of you on this one here. But let me explain what I mean by that. No matter how great your conversational skills may be, your efforts will be completely wasted if you're not sensible to your client's needs. It's crucial to be aware of your client's, quote, silent messages, those facial expressions, those hands, those feet movement, which often reveal the real meaning behind the verbal ones. Enthusiasm, it is literally impossible to be a top seller in any field without a contagious sense of enthusiasm. Your enthusiasm, good eye contact, and your overall sincerity will tell your clients that you're an honest person. Zig Ziglar is famous for saying, for every sale you miss because you're too enthusiastic, you'll miss 100 because you're not enthusiastic enough. Maturity, one of the things that distinguishes a person is the ability to recognize the need to do things, whether liking them or not. And in addition, mature people accept responsibility for their actions. So encompassed in all of this is that maturity factor. And what we started off talking about is professionalism. Professionalism is a state of mind and conduct. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. Professionalism is the natural consequence of developing the other 7 traits that are mentioned on this slide above. So I want to highly encourage you to take a look at these 7 traits. What is it that you need to improve in? And by doing so, I guarantee you'll increase your sales not only of geothermal, but of all your products and services that you're offering. Well, let's jump into what is geothermal. We need to understand some of the key traits that go into geothermal and why we design and utilize it in our recommendations. The first thing to understand is that geothermal is technically classified as a solar technology by the DOE. And this slide reveals that 46% of the energy that's emitted from the sun is stored and retained in the ground. I often tell people that you and I walk, eat, sleep, drink, and live on the largest storage container, battery, if you will, and that's the Earth. And that is what we're going to be tapping into in this geothermal technology that we're going to explore the rest of this time. You know, everybody has a heat pump, and we're going to utilize heat pump technology in geothermal. Oftentimes when I travel throughout the north and the New England areas, they'll say, we don't want a heat pump. But in reality, everyone has one in their home in the form of a refrigerator. And if they're properly designed and installed, they can work very effective. And air conditioning is the same thing. So in heating and air conditioning, the true science of that is we're moving energy. We're moving heat. And that's what we're going to do with geothermal. And in this illustration, we're going to move that condenser that we normally set outside by their bedroom or their deck where they least desire it, and we're going to utilize the ground. So we're going to couple with the ground with a loop. In essence, I'm going to put the condensing unit in the ground. I'm just not going to put the copper and the Freon in the ground. I'm going to be utilizing polyethylene pipe and a water and oftentimes some type of an antifreeze solution mixed in with it to gleam that. Let's take a look at why is that effective. You know, the ground temperature in this illustration, we're in the heating mode, and we're going to extract heat from the ground. In a typical heat pump, we're extracting heat from the outside air. In this illustration, we know just from experience, when we need the most heat, it's generally the coldest temperatures outside, which means the outdoor unit, the regular DX unit as we refer to them, is least effective. But in geothermal, I'm dealing with an environment that generally is around that 50-degree environment. Why should we utilize high-quality fossil fuels that are mobile fuel capable of burning at 1,000 degrees just to heat a building to a low temperature barely above that in the earth right below it? It'd be like taking electrical wire, making electrical wire, if you will, out of silver instead of copper. It works great, but it's a waste of a precious resource. And that's why we're looking at with geothermal. In the summer, with the geothermal system, we're simply going to reverse the cycle, and we're going to reject heat into the earth, and which is at a more constant temperature and closer to the temperature of the environment we're trying to create in our home or our buildings. We're going to utilize water, which is one of the most effective means of transferring energy, versus air, which is one of the least effective means of moving energy, which is typically what we use with our DX systems. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, a simple illustration of that would be, if I were to have went outside of my home a few weeks ago, it was still in the mid-50s to low 50s, and if I'd only had my gym trunks on when I went out there, I would have been able to stand it. I wouldn't have froze to death. I'd have probably got chilly, but I would have been okay. It wouldn't have harmed my health. However, if I go and jump into a lake that's 50 degrees, I have literally maybe minutes, possibly seconds, to get out of that lake before hypothermia and death starts setting in. It's just this very simple of example of how that water transfers heat energy much more effective than air. And in the next slide here, we see what the constant temperature of this earth is across the United States. And you can see from this that this is a technology that works anywhere in North America. You can see above the Tennessee, mid-Tennessee, and up above, it's going to be there in the 50s or to the low 40s, all the way down to Florida at the tip of it up in the 70s, all of which are very near the temperatures that we're trying to generate within our building and our home spaces. Well, is there really a need for geothermal? Why do we need that? One of the biggest drivers that's driving this whole conversation with geothermal and this technology is the conversation of energy. And energy has been defined as the ability to do work. If we were to look at an example of how does energy work, let's run through a cycle, if you would. Oil burns to make heat. That heat will boil water. The water will turn to steam. Steam pressure turns a turbine. A turbine turns an electric generator. Generator produces electricity. Electricity powers light bulbs. Light bulbs give off light and heat. And thus you have, if you will, the cycle of energy, the cycle of life for one path of energy that's going on. Well, when we enter into an energy discussion, there's always two types. One is the renewable type, dealing with wind, water, sun, vegetation, and internal earth. And you can see we're dealing with everything from hydropower to wind power to biomass. Internal earth is dealing with geothermal, but it's different than the geothermal we're discussing today. We're not talking about the hot gases that come out like in Old Faithful out there in the park. We're dealing with transferring energy into the Earth's surface and also with solar energy that's being stored there in the renewable side. There's also a non-renewable side, which is what the majority of the energy sources are today, and that would include our oil, our gas, our coal, and our nuclear energy are all non-renewable sources. Well, 41% of the energy used in the economy is in the commercial and the residential sectors. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, primarily on the residential sector here today, but we're focusing on those two sectors with the geothermal. How do we produce our energy in the United States? This shows that only 8% of the energy that's produced in the United States comes from some type of a renewable source. You can see that petroleum, natural gas, and coal still lead the way in producing energy. Since we have some Canadians on here today, when you look at your energy distribution, only 7% comes from nuclear, only 1% coming from other types of alternative fuels, mainly from oil, natural gas, and coal, and there's a considerable amount of hydroelectric done throughout the Canadian market. We want to further examine this just a little more to show you a few slides for you to have. This shows the world energy or electricity net consumption basically modeled out to 2025. And it's no surprise who's leading the way in energy consumption, and that would be the United States. But you can also see there's some aggressive growth that is going on from China and some other nations that are right along there with us in the consumption that is happening. What about oil? Oil is the same way. When we look at what our consumption is, at least here in the United States, you can see obviously our consumption is far outpacing and has been doing so for quite some time our supply. Currently, we spend about $1.3 billion a day on imported oil into the United States, and that is going to do nothing but grow as the trends show. This next slide shows that how that in the early 80s, our production started underperforming. Actually, way before that, back in the early 1950s, we weren't producing what we were consuming, and our imports are going to continue to rise, and what's happening there. But electricity and oil are not the only two that are being discussed. Natural gas is much the same way. You can see the growth curve for all of the North America in this slide here, modeled through 2025. And natural gas is the same way on the production scale. But what type of resources are available to us? This is an interesting perspective on our energy future. The small cube on the top is 1 year of total energy use by the whole world in all forms. And all the other smaller cubes are the total known reserves of that kind of energy. We've already discussed in the past few slides how that the top cube will continue to get bigger every year, which means we're going to drill through these other reserves fairly quickly. What really interests us and should interest you and your clients is the large bottom cube at the bottom, and that is the solar energy that's falling on the earth every year. And this is where we need to be looking at how do we tap into that box of energy with all that we're doing in our buildings. Well, how is energy divvied up within a home? This shows that 69% of the energy is utilized in the HVAC and the hot water realm. So that's what we're going to talk about today with this geothermal, is how do we minimize that energy being used in that 69%. This slide shows, and we'll unpack in the next few slides, how that we can take that 69% and glean about 49% of that from the earth with this process. We can take that HVAC that on the previous slide was at 49% down to 15%. And we can also take the hot water that was at 20% all the way down to 5% with the geothermal technology. Well, you say, Richard, how in the world are you going to do that? Well, conceptually, when you look at this process, we're going to take 1 kilowatt of electricity that's generated by the grid. We're going to utilize that to power our pump, our compressor, and if you have a water-to-air type system, we'll have a fan moving air inside of the home. Take that 1 kilowatt of energy, and we're going to move it through the ground with water, and we're going to take out of the ground, as this slide shows, anywhere from 3 to 5 units of energy from the ground, which means we're going to end up with a system that has an efficiency of 400 to 600%, or in the heating and air conditioning world, we refer to that as a COP. So you can see the typical annual energy savings from these are going to range anywhere from 30 to 60%. They're a high, very, very high efficient technology and process of conditioning homes and buildings. Well, we've established that, yes, the process is viable, that there is a need, but now we've got to go in and we've got to present this to our clients. Throughout this process today, when I think about sales process, I really boil it down to probably 2 types of selling. One is transaction-oriented selling, and then within that arena, the only thing as a sales associate that you're concerned about is that one transaction while you're there. After that, you really don't care. Or there's the relational selling model, which is where we see a lot of of models being built and modeled against, and that will be sort of the foundation of thought process throughout our conversation and the remaining of this discussion here. Unfortunately, there's a majority of HVAC dealers that don't give their customers any choices. You realize HVAC is in the top 5 most expensive purchases that any homeowner will make, and they don't know all the choices that they have. That's why they have you there. That's why they've called a professional. And as a professional, if we only go in and give them one choice, perhaps we've made the wrong read on that customer. Perhaps we've not given them all the information that they need, and we're working out of assumption. So I want to highly encourage you in your sales process to give them choices. One way of doing that has been around in the industry forever, is giving them a good, better, best. You'll increase your sales of higher efficiency equipment, which will equate to more commissions and more profits for your companies. Studies have shown that when people are presented with 3 choices, they will choose the middle and above over 60% of the time. So I encourage you to give them choices when you go into any situation. Even if they tell you they think they know everything, which very few of them do, but will tell you that, still give them some choices because you have a great potential of increasing your sales. Well, when we're in the sales process, what are some of the necessary elements that are needed to make this a successful sales process? This slide in and of itself could be a whole day seminar, but we're going to just cover it at a macro level here, if you will. You know, the pre-visit, both you and your staff are key in setting the tone for your visit and the knowledge you have going into that visit. From the first time that these people touch your company, whether it's by email, internet, or via the phone, starts this sales process for you. So it's key that everybody's on board and understands professionalism with that. Next thing you're going to need to be concerned with is a home survey or fact-finding, some type of a homeowner questionnaire, a site survey. And you're going to need these items to prepare properly this proposal for these people, these recommendations. They're also necessary for the next two steps, which is a heat loss. I really, really want to encourage you. For a lot of people in HVAC, this is the 4-letter word, load, and they want to stay away from that. But I hope that you're not one of the type of dealers on the line today that stands at the curb and looks at how many fingers covers the house, and you determine that's how many tons go in the home. Please, please don't do that with geothermal. We encourage you to highly to run that load. Even if equipment is there, do not assume that someone properly sized it in there. And then also we offer through Climate Master a design tool we call Geo Designer. You also need some type of a software that will assist you in picking the right system for your load, for designing that loop, and also for all the economics of the operation. And lastly is putting that proposal portfolio together and doing the presentation. You know, if you're leaving proposals and presentations for people and they're on the back of a business card or a napkin, I highly encourage you to change. Chances are if you've been doing that, you probably haven't sold too many geothermal or high-efficient systems. What should be included in that? Well, just real briefly, you should have a company brochure describing who your company is. Give some validity to your company there if they're not familiar with you. Copies of licenses and certificates are always helpful. Info on different options that you're going to be offering them. Operating costs could be included in there in your different options, the different doors that you're going to present to them, which will be included in that economics that you're going to be discussing that we'll unpack here in just a few minutes. What type of warranty and benefits will you be offering to your customers? And then, obviously, all of this is driving towards bringing this customer into the fold, making them a customer, not just for this sale, but for continuing sales on down the road. This customer has more value to us and we to them than this one simple transaction. So I encourage you to include all of those elements in your presentation and in your process as you go about it. Well, what's the advantage? What's the true advantage to geothermal? Well, take a look at the next slide here shows, and we'll walk through some of those, and these are things that you would unpack with your customers in conversation as you're walking around the home or in your presentation. Some point throughout the whole process, you'll unpack the majority of these advantages, if you will. So let's take a look at them. Generally, no other heating and cooling system offers lower operating costs with savings up to 60% as compared to ordinary systems as geothermal does. They also provide comfort. They provide even temperatures throughout the home year-round with excellent dehumidification even during cooling. Why is that? Because I have a more stable environment that I'm transferring heat in and out. They're environmentally sound. Geothermal is a clean, green, and renewable technology to reduce your carbon footprint now and for future generations. They're very reliable also. The normal geothermal unit will last longer than a normal ordinary heat air conditioner or heat pump. ASHRAE has stated that has given geothermal a 20-year lifespan versus 15 on a normal heat pump. Many of you on the call today have actually either have one operating in your home or possibly your company has installed one, and you're familiar with the fact that they're very quiet. We utilize heavy-duty, fully insulated cabinets for quiet operation. The variable speed blower motors that are in most of the units out there today also make these quiet. And unlike ordinary heating and air conditioning units, I don't have to have an outdoor unit with geothermal. So it all can be away from these places where they generally want things quiet. We can take that out of there, and never underestimate how many people purchase geothermal simply for that reason alone. Flexibility, you can produce heating, cooling, and supplemental water heating from a single unit. And there are a wide variety of models and options to fit most applications. Talking about the free hot water, any time during the operation, Geo units have the ability to produce potable hot water, which can supplement the home's water heater. Energy independence is a huge thing. Geothermal systems will reduce our need to import fuel. You can see very shortly in this conversation we've already had the ability to reduce energy dependence on all types of other fuels and sources. And not only that, but lastly, it's safe and clean. There's no flame, there's no flue, and there's no odors. And that is a huge one for a majority of people today. They're looking for that. That in and of itself a lot of times will be the key decision maker for your client to decide, I do want to go to that geothermal. But the industry has taken studies and shown, well, why is it that customers are purchasing geothermal? Well, the largest reason is 27% showing the studies taken that they want lower heating and cooling bills. 21% make their decision based on the economics of the system. The green product environmental concerns is still up there in the top. It's 15%. The installation process, tax credits that we'll unpack in a moment, round out around 10. And interestingly, your experience, don't underestimate that. That's why we covered that in the few slides back on what to include, because 5% of the people who buy geothermal weigh in on what is the dealer's experience with this and with HVAC. Well, who exactly makes up the customer that we're going to be selling to? Who are these customers that we need to be identifying and looking for, having on our radar screen, if you will? Well, the characteristics of those customers are obviously they're homeowners or they're soon to be homeowners. They're in the process of building a home possibly. You'll generally see that age category somewhere between 25 and 54, and they'll have a combined income generally in excess of $100,000. And their home value will generally exceed $150,000. One of the keys is that they're receptive to energy bill savings or to the green message. Those are keys with who your customers are. This next slide shows. There we go. We're having a little. Next slide shows that there's a lot of opportunity out there for this type of customer. 20% of the people out there fall into an income bracket that we have described on the last slide. So 20% of the population out here is your potential, if you will. If we only worked off of those dynamics on the last slide, who would buy geothermal? If we break it down a little further, we'll see, that generational and socioeconomic factors also play a part in their buying habits. And we're dealing potentially with 4 generational groups that we've outlined here on the screen. But primarily, we're going to be dealing with 2 of those 4, and this slide shows that the largest potential buying group at this particular point in 2010 will be the baby boomers and the Generation X generation. So let's unpack just a couple of characteristics of these 2 groups. The baby boomers were born in 1946 and spanned through 1964. So it means you're dealing with a clientele that's anywhere from 47 to 65 years old. And there's 77 million people out here that fall into this category. 27% of our population are the baby boomers. But of that 27%, they control 50% of the personal income. $2 trillion of buying habit is available through this customer base. So they're among the wealthiest. They're the best educated, often the most sophisticated of all the purchasing groups, generational groups that are there right now. And they have a tendency to buy for themselves. They're a consumption-oriented group. They like the latest, the most modern type products, and they like everybody to know that they have those products. So this baby boomer group, when we go in to sell and we see they're there, I'm going to have some of these characteristics in the back of my mind because it's going to impact the way that I relay my information and my sales process to this particular client. But also another group that also is largely there is the Generation X. This is a group of people that range anywhere from 1960 to 1981. So in other words, we have a people group that ages range from 30 to 41. And there's about 69 million of Generation X's there, 24% of the population. However, this generation is still getting their family and all of that going, so they're still broke. They're probably still paying for school loans, if you will. Some of the other characteristics that are known about them is they're very individual. They like to be different. They're diverse, so they're open to a wide range of everything. They're also very self-sufficient. So being aware of that means you have a little more struggle establishing trust sometimes with Generation X people than you do with the baby boomers. But the one nice thing about this generation is that last point, in that change is definitely welcome with this group, whereas change may or may not be as welcome with that baby boomer group. Professional sales associates also understand the consumer decision-making process. And as we run around this circle here, we see, first off, the consumer is going to identify a specific problem, which in this case is going to be dealing with the comfort conditioning of their home, and they're going to recognize, look, I got to take care of this problem. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to look inside themselves and say, can I solve this problem? And if they can't solve the problem, they're going to move to step 3, which is an external search, which is where you and I come into the game, and offering some type of information, some type of expertise and service to help them solve their problem that they're having. We're going to give them a solution. After looking externally at whatever amount of time or breadth that they want to do, they're going to make a decision. They're going to decide this is the most suitable solution for me at this time for this particular problem. And then when they're done, they're going to evaluate how they did and put some of this back away so that if they ever have to do this again, they'll be a little further along the curve, if you will, in the buying process. So understanding this is how the normal consumer is going to function and work through also helps us walk them through those stages and get to the making of a buying decision and a positive evaluation at the end of it. But as we go along the sales continuum, well, do objections make you do this? Is this what happens to you when objections come about? Well, I hope not. In selling, one definition of an objection is a reason given by a prospective customer why they are not ready to buy your product or service. Your success as a professional salesperson will depend on your ability to anticipate and handle a prospect's objections. No matter how perfect your presentation is, at some stage, your prospect's going to raise an objection, and how you handle it will make or break the sales game. You always will get objections, just face it. You may have the world's best service, the best product available in your category or industry, but no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, you're always going to have to deal with objections. I believe most people simply have limiting beliefs of some sort. It may be a fear of failure, fear of being ripped off, a fear of being overwhelmed, whatever it is. The problem is that these objections keep them from finding the solutions that solve their most pressing problems. And often their self-doubt is what's getting in the way of your success and their success in properly solving the problem with the solution that's there. You know, objections are actually a good sign that you're close to the sale. I didn't believe this at first in my career, but over the years of talking to prospects and having to answer their questions, or objections, if you will, I see how true it is. Here's why. If somebody were completely not interested in what you or I have to offer, they wouldn't continue to interact with you. They wouldn't waste their time. So if they're asking questions and offering up objections, there's a large part of them that's interested. And that means all you have to do is answer the questions, reassure them, and you're on your way to a sale. Better yet, by hiring you, the prospect is finally on their way to a solution that probably has been plaguing them for a long time. You know, objections are a way for a prospect to acknowledge that the self-doubt we talked about or the limiting beliefs that stop them in their tracks. It's actually your job to help them get out of the way, get out of their own way, if you will, so they can experience success. You do this by anticipating and then breaking down the objections. One trainer puts it this way. He walks them down the hallway and opens all the doors and deals with the skeletons behind the doors before the consumer can even bring it up. Another objection is, or one of the first objections is this technology proven? Is this something viable? Well, it's definitely not new. The first recorded patent was in 1912 in a Swiss lake with a copper tubing loop in the lake. In 1993, the EPA produced a statement that said geothermal is basically the best technology, the most proven technology to reduce carbon footprint and also to reduce energy usage. This next slide really gets me excited because this is the growth curve for the geothermal industry. And you can see on this slide that since 1904, we've been on a very aggressive Pikes Peak, if you will, growth curve here, and it is not stopping yet. So it's only up when you look at this. For the Canadians, the growth curve is still the same also. Even before tax credits in the U.S., that growth curve started in 2004. That was even before our tax credits. So there's a tremendous interest in the marketplace for geothermal. You may be familiar with the product life cycle curve, which is what's portrayed here. And you can see geothermal in a global environment where it's at on its curve, and it's not peaked anywhere. The most mature market is over in Sweden, which is up in the low 90%. But you can see that here in the United States, 100-year technology, we're now still on the beginning cusp of this technology continuing to model, which it will, what has gone on throughout the rest of the globe. So that really excites me about this business and geothermal that we're in. Well, geothermal, there's over 1 million geothermal installations, and the total installed annual energy savings is about $8 billion worth of kilowatts of electricity, or 40 billion BTUs of fossil fuels. It's going to reduce our reliance on imported oils by 21.5 million barrels of crude oil a year. It's huge, the prospect of what is happening with geothermal. One of the other major objections that you and I will face in any type of sales orientation, but also with geothermal, is that of price. This is probably the biggest objection that not only the potential buyer has to overcome, but you as well. If you haven't dealt with this one yourself, you can't help your customer deal with it either. Gene Motch, one of the winningest coaches ever, said, you can't lead anyone else further than you've gone yourself. So what I want to do is take the remaining 5 or 6 minutes and unpack the economics, if you will, of this price. How do we overcome that? Well, when presenting geothermal, there we go. When presenting geothermal, we need to present it from a perspective of return on investment, or ROI. No matter whether they're financing it or paying cash for this system, we need to approach this technology from a return on investment. And a proper discussion also includes what is the total cost of ownership and what's wrapped up in that total cost of ownership. Well, efficiency. Ground source heat pumps are one of the most efficient residential heating and cooling systems available today. We've talked about that, how that they'll have heating efficiencies 50 to 70% higher than any other heating system, or cooling efficiencies 20 to 40% higher than any other available air conditioning. That directly translates into money back into their pocket that right now they're paying the utility companies for. How about maintenance? According to ASHRAE Report 382, ASHRAE states that geothermal maintenance costs are documented at 23.9 cents a square foot. That's 4 cents less a square foot than any other type of system that you or I might design for a building. And then lastly, life expectancy. Again, ASHRAE Report TC 1.8 states that the life expectancy of geothermal systems is 20 years versus 18 on fossil fuel and 15 years on heat pumps. This slide shows also some of the things that will go into helping people understand how does ground source heat pumps, which is the GHP at the bottom there, compare to air source heat pumps and combustion-based type things. So safety, those are a high concern when you're in combustion things. But you can look across through there, and safety, installation costs, yes, is high on geothermal on the front end, on the initial installation, but we'll cover that here in just a moment. But everything else about this geothermal system points to the fact that, hey, this is an excellent decision for us to consider. You will also need to keep in mind when putting your proposal together, we put this in here for reference for you, there's a lot of rebates that are out there and available, rebates and incentives. DesireUSA.org is probably one of the best, most up-to-date repositories of information for you to look at, so I encourage you to go look at that. And as we wind down here, I want to take and look at a comparison that I put together that I would consider worst-case scenario here. And in this one here, I've taken some average cost for equipment. I've thrown in some miscellaneous. We've put in $3,200 of labor, which was at $800 a crew day would be 4 days. They should be shot if it takes that long. We put a 30% profit margin on this. We've included the loop with a 10% profit margin, and we also put the landscaping in this with a margin on it, and I've came up with a 3-ton replacement with geothermal going in at $27,437. I've also taken an 18-SEER competitive unit, put it in there in a replacement scenario with 30% profit margin, some miscellaneous and labor on there, and I was very generous in that. And we have a cost of that just a little bit under $12,000. Now let's carry that through, and how do we talk about return on investment with these two illustrations right here. This next one here comes from a piece of software that we offer, and I'll walk down through this just real quickly to show you some of the economics of it. First, we see those two installed system prices, what they are. In this illustration, I've utilized the federal tax credit available in the United States, which is 30% on the whole job, uncapped, and that rebate is good through the end of 2016. So that's a huge portion in there. That's $8,200 in this illustration. On the other side, we had a couple of discrepancies here, so the slides that you download will actually have what I talk about. I had 500 on this one. I had some typo errors. It's actually 350 on a government rebate on that type of system there. So that is put in there. And the net cost of this system, this $27,000 system versus the $11,000, after the rebate, I have initial cost extra of $7,600. Then the next line here, we see the operating cost. It shows there $1,299 versus $2,158, or very close to that on your slide. And the difference between that is further down towards the bottom of the slide, and it shows $859, or right close to that for you, in operating savings with the geothermal. If you were doing this illustration with natural gas at $1.05 a therm, it'd be about $277. Propane would be about $33.52 in total operating costs, as would natural would be oil at $4 a gallon. We've assumed a 5% down payment, and this maximum out of pocket is a big key there. It's showing $2,700, or $2,700 on yours, $2,415 on mine. That is basically at the end of this 10-year loan that we've assumed in this. This is how much the difference that they will have spent at the end of that 10 years versus if they'd have went with the conventional system. And the next slide will unpack further a cash flow, if you will, analysis of what is happening with this transaction. It's divided into two halves. The top half of that is geo analysis. The bottom is the 18 SEER. And if we walk through this, basically, if we added up these two columns, you have about a $15,000 upfront cost difference without any rebates between the geothermal and the brand X. You're going to spend about $5,000 more in interest rate on the geothermal. But when we come to the fuel cost, you're going to save almost $21,000 in utility bills over the 20-year lifespan of this unit. And you'll also pick up an additional $8,900 in tax rebates, because not only you get your federal tax, but you're also, we have this set at a 20% tax bracket here, which is not aggressive. They'll also be able to deduct the interest every year on that. So for a total of $10,000 in interest, which means they've invested $7,600 extra on the front end, and even with financing and 6% interest at 10 years, they still will have a positive return, and they'll take that 76 and turn it into 91.55. And if you didn't have any tax incentives, which they don't in Canada, you still would net out, where is that, with about that is on my next slide here, I'm sorry. The other thing you can include in this real quick is even in like North Carolina, they have an additional 35%. This next slide shows if they pay cash, and we're really behind, so I'm not going to be able to unpack that. But the key to that is that in this illustration, which I think is obscene in the pricing, still shows an 8.5-year payback on this with that extra $7,600 investment, and they would need to have positioned their money somewhere where they were getting 12.1% interest over the lifespan of that. And the next slide, when you look at the bottom line difference in those, basically shows a positive return, almost doubling their investment if they paid cash. It's very, very, very important that, as we've been having in this discussion, that you have some type of financing available for your customers. There's a lot of different methods out there for you to do, and so make sure that you have that available. Because the goal of all we've spoken about today here in this really short period of time is applying the Benjamin Franklin method, really. And that quote was related a lot by Zig Ziglar, and he said, you can have anything in life if you will just help other people get what they want. And Tony Alessandra, in this next slide, said, your professionalism is defined not by the business you're in, but by the way you're in business. And if you will adopt and perfect and even enhance a lot of the conversation that we've had today, I guarantee you that you'll be well on your way down the path of success and not the path of failure in establishing a geothermal product line and business as part of your portfolio and offering for your customers. Well, I realize that we've really went rapidly through this, but there was a lot of things that I felt were necessary to include for you to be able to download and unpack later, whether through our webinars or whatever. So I appreciate your attention today. And, Barb, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Richard, for a great presentation. Now let's address some of those questions that have been submitted throughout the program. First of all, now geothermal systems have a very high upfront cost, which can deter some people from going into this. Is it advisable as an alternative to propose to a customer that their geothermal system is undersized with stronger backup to cut costs and still try to keep a good amount of operational savings?
Well, we do see that being done in the industry. We do not recommend that because one of the major reasons, as we've discussed throughout the day, is the driving better stewardship of our energy resources. And so by doing that type of protocol, we're actually being more short-sighted than long-sighted in our designs.
Okay. What is the average temperature of the water delivered from the geothermal system for the free hot water system?
It varies by manufacturer. Those temperatures will range anywhere from 120 degrees to 150 degrees.
Okay. Is it a worthwhile approach to offer financing of the geothermal system on the actual savings to reach a larger proportion of the population that could be interested in this technology?
As I travel across the United States and talk with dealers, both in the United States and Canada, it's very evident in our economic environment today that to be successful not only with geothermal but with your other offerings within your companies, you really need to have the financing available option there. A lot of people are looking for that type of thing, even if it's simply the taking of credit cards so that they can get their points out there, which a lot of them can put the whole geothermal on their American Express and get their points. So the ability to not only take credit cards but to have financing available, I think, is almost a non-negotiable in this economy today.
One person wonders if Climate Master has a geothermal presentation book available that can be customized.
We do have that available in various formats, and they can feel free to contact us after this, and we'll put them in touch with the appropriate distribution channels and management teams that can help them do that.
One person would like to know if there are specific contractor certifications that they should be looking at to make sure they're getting a well-trained and qualified dealer.
There is. It varies by country. In Canada, there's a more stringent certification methodology is utilized up there. And in Canada, you actually have to be a certified company, a certified installer, and a certified designer with every project that you do that will receive government rebates. In the United States, there's a lot of different certifications that the various manufacturers do, Climate Master included. We have several levels of that, as well as the industry standards, which is driven through ICSPA certification, which we highly recommend for everyone that's going to be installing geothermal.
Now, speaking of Canada, are there ground temperature maps of well depths from 3 to 60 feet in Canada, specifically Alberta?
Yes, those are available. I apologize in not having that in the slide today, where we were just limited in our time frame and could not include all of those type of things. But we'd be happy to help you locate those, and we'll address that in some of the follow-up questions.
Great. This is very interesting. What are some of the traits of the top dealers in the country?
What are some of the traits of the top dealers in the country?
Yep.
By far, the top dealers with geothermal that I see embody professionalism. So they're definitely professional. They're well educated. They've made their depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation that is very adept with them. They offer high customer service. They're very customer focused in what they're doing. And we also see that they're very adept on the various technologies that are offered today, not only geothermal. And I see that the majority of them are, the top dealers are offering choices to their clients. I have often said that this is by no means statistically correct, but it appears that the average dealer that is selling geothermal across the United States is probably selling 5 or 6 units, possibly at the most, and that's generally only because that's all the people that ask them for it, and they're not including it in their offering. And then a lot of the top dealers also have professional sales staff. It really depends on the size of the company, though. The size of the company doesn't necessarily dictate the qualification of being a top distributor. The professionalism, they have websites, they're adept on technology, because even in how they do presentations, baby boomers probably would like more of a paper type thing, or they're iffy on coming in there with an iPad or a laptop. Generation X, you better have a laptop or an iPad. So they're adept on all the different strategies. They understand people and how people make buying decisions. I hope that answers the question briefly.
It did for me.
Okay, good.
What type of commercial tax credits are available specifically for single-stage or two-stage requirements?
Okay, in the federal tax credits, and you can reference more information on this from Energy Star, or you can also find it linked through our website at climatemaster.com. But on the commercial side, it's basically a 10% tax credit on the job, and it has a much more aggressive depreciation schedule in the fact that they can depreciate the whole system in the first 5 years, with 50% of it available in the first year. And often we see in most modeling that's done on these geothermal jobs commercially, you'll see payback. They'll be in not payback, but they'll be in positive cash flow generally within the second, at the most, a lot of times in the third year. So it's a very, very high, rate that people are becoming understanding is geothermal and looking at it in the light commercial arena for sure.
Do you need to add a storage tank in addition to the homeowner's water tank for the heated water that a geothermal system produces?
In some instances, yes, you do. In our classes, we'll show schematical designs that if they're using a two-element electrical water heater, that's not necessary. It can pipe directly into the existing water heater. If they're using a single element or some type of a fossil fuel water heater, then we encourage that they do utilize some type of a buffer tank, even if it's just another water heater in between them.
And one final question here, also related to hot water systems. And then, of course, Richard will be following up with the remaining questions after this webinar is over. If they have an instant hot water system, is there a tie-in solution?
Yes, there is. And so basically in our training classes, we offer advanced training on that and schematics, but as long as the instant water heater will accept the temperatures of hot water that our unit's putting out, you can pair that with them. Often with a buffer tank is utilized with that.
I'm going to throw in one last question here. How do I find out what incentives my state offers?
Reference back to the slide on desireusa.org that was in our presentation, and that you can find everything that's available to you right here on this slide, and the web address is at the top.
Very good. We are right up to 2 o'clock. This concludes today's webinar. Please join me in thanking our excellent presenter, as well as our sponsor, Climate Master, Inc.,